Okay, we are going to go ahead and get started this morning. I'd like to welcome everyone and Happy New Year. It's 2019. You are muted, but you can type questions in the box and I will answer them at the end. Can everyone hear me? Remind me at the end to give you today's password for extra credit. Okay, we are going to get started. Have you ever heard someone say they are making New Year resolutions? Or have you ever made one yourself? Do you know what a New Year's resolution is all about? Well, today that's what we're going to talk about. So I'm going to pull up our PowerPoint. You should be able to see the screen with me. So today's topic, New Year's resolutions. What is that all about? Today's topic, really we want to know what is a resolution. We are going to briefly learn about the background of resolutions. Why are they so hard to achieve? Ways to help us be successful, and some examples of resolutions. We are going to also look at some alternatives to making a New Year's resolutions. Resolutions are like goals. The words really are kind of interchangeable, but resolutions have a long history. And resolutions are used to help people better themselves in some type of way. Maybe your teachers are asking you to set some goals, especially because it is a new year. Or maybe your friends and family are discussing their resolutions. Maybe on New Year's Day, some of you experienced family members talking about what they would like to achieve for this upcoming year. And maybe you even heard conversations on how they really were not as successful with those goals as they hoped. But hopefully most of them were able to achieve some of the goals they set in 2018 and were able to have a sense of accomplishment from that. Resolutions really can help you in many ways. So let's take a look at the past history of New Year's resolutions. So as you can see from the slide, the religious background started as early as the Babylonians. The custom of making New Year's resolutions has been around for thousands of years, but it hasn't always looked like it does today. They began as religious practices. The ancient Babylonians are said to have been the first people to make New Year's resolutions, and that was about 4,000 years ago. So resolutions really have a long history. They were also the first to hold recorded celebrations in honor of the new year. For most of them, though, the new year did not begin in January as we currently know it, but it began in mid-March when their crops were planted. And so they would have like a massive celebration, a religious type of celebration. It lasted about 12 days. They named a new king, placed a crown on the new king, and really made a commitment to be loyal to that king. And during this time, they also made promises to gods to pay their debts and return any objects that they had borrowed. These promises that they made could be considered like the forerunners of resolutions that we know of today. If the Babylonian people kept their resolution or kept their word to the gods would show them favor in the upcoming year. And if you can imagine, if they were not successful, then the gods would not really show them favor. And this was not a place that the Babylonian people wanted to be. They wanted to have the favor of the gods. A similar practice also happened in ancient Rome. And Julius Caesar was responsible for this because he was kind of like someone who wanted to make a difference, make things better. So he began reforming the calendar and really changed it from the beginning of the year starting in March to the beginning of the year starting in January. And this name of January was called after a two-faced God whose spirit was said to be in the doorways and in arches of the doorways. His name was Janus. And so as a part of this, let's go back to our slide. As a part of this, the God who inhabited these doorways and arches, the people of Rome, seen that as a representation of the doorway looking into something or looking into the future, or the doorway looking back at something, back into the past. So the Babylonians looked at this as looking into the previous year or looking into the upcoming year. They made sacrifices to these gods, and part of their sacrifices consisted of making promises of good conduct or good behavior for the upcoming year. And that can be considered another facet of making resolutions. If we go a little bit more modern and looking at the religious background of resolutions, early Christians also celebrated the beginning of the new year by thinking about the things that they had done wrong in the previous year and wanting to do better in the upcoming year. In 1740, there was an English clergyman named John Wesley. He was actually the founder of the Methodist Church, and he created what is called a watch night service, and this happened on New Year's Eve. And so during the late evening of New Year's Eve, Christians would gather together and they would sing songs and quote scripture, and they would make these commitments or resolutions of bettering themselves throughout the new year. Now, this practice does continue in many churches today, and those services are considered to be called watch night services. And so even though these resolutions has a history of a background in a religion, most of us know these practices of making resolutions today as a secular practice. So instead of people making promises to God, most people really kind of make these promises or resolutions to themselves, and it is an act of focusing on making self-improvement, which sometimes is really hard to keep when we focus on trying to make something better. And actually, the research that I'm referencing, reading from, is from the History Channel, and they say as many as 45% of Americans actually say that they make a New Year's resolution, but only 8% of that 45% actually achieves their goals throughout the year. But once again, the resolutions have had a long history of about 4,000 years. So let's take a look here. Let's go to our next slide. Why make resolutions? You can see from these two comic strips that some people just think they're perfectly fine how they are. And some people think it's just a to-do list for the upcoming year. Well, that may be the case for these cartoon characters, but let's take a look. So depending on where you get your numbers, between 81% and 92% of the New Year's resolutions fail. That's a really high number. So what that really means is about 8 times out of 10, you're going to fall back on your old habits. You're not going to stick with this new behavior. That shouldn't be a discouragement, but I just wanted to bring that point out to you because there's some ways to be successful, and we're going to start with those in just a second. So let's take a look here at our next slide. According to research, this is our little research statement here. While as many as 45% of Americans say they usually make New Year's resolutions, only 8% are successful. But we've had about 4,000 years of practicing, so why would this be so hard? Okay, while you kind of read over some of the examples, I'm going to give you some tips for helping to make the New Year's resolution successful. Are some ways that you can avoid things that causes people not to be successful. So I'm going to give you 5 tips. The first tip is really trying to change everything at one time. If you set unrealistic goals and you try to make too many of them at one time, you are not going to be successful. It's going to be too challenging. The suggestion is that you only try to change 3 habits at once. You can even consider changing 1 habit at a time, and when you have been successful with that habit or that goal, then you can move to the next. It can be real tiny goals. So, for example, instead of thinking, maybe I'm going to do 25 push-ups, start with something simple and say, I'm going to do 3 push-ups a day. That may seem so simplistic that it almost seems like that's just too easy. But the importance is being consistent and following through on the commitment. So even if your new habits are that small, you should not do any more than 3 habits at a time. So they give an example in the research, and they talk about instead of doing too much at one time, for example, do something like for 6 months, focus on going to the gym Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So once that becomes a routine, then you can move to your next habit. Maybe the next habit is to do some writing, and you want to write every day. So on Mondays and Thursdays, you're going to start writing for 10 minutes every day. So then begin that until it becomes a habit, which may take several weeks. Once you accomplish that, then take your 3rd goal and work on that routine until it is established. Okay, one thing that you can do is you can focus on a keystone habit. This keystone habit is like an overall habit, but it has other benefits to it. So for instance, if you focus on going to the gym, you are already taking care of having more energy, having better sleep, being able to focus more, and maybe even while you're going to the gym, you want to start becoming more healthy, so you start eating more nutritious foods. So this is like a keystone example. The gym would be the overall example, but then there are additional benefits that you can achieve because of going to the gym. So problem 2 is starting with a habit that is too big. In our example from doing push-ups, when we might have been somebody who did no push-ups at all, we can't expect to go from doing 0 to doing 25 push-ups and be consistent with that. The goal is too big. So keep the goal small. Start with a behavior that is so small it seems easy and reasonable to do every day. For instance, I love to read books, but every time I sit on my sofa to begin reading a book, a few minutes later, I am so tired, I just fall asleep and I wind up not reading anything from my book. So a suggestion would be, instead of me trying to focus on reading a whole book a month, I might focus on reading 2 to 3 pages a night until that becomes a consistent habit for me. That is a small goal. It does not seem like very much, but it will help me to become consistent, confident, and be able to achieve my New Year's resolution. So the other problem is you focus on your behavior, not the outcome on it. Seeking a result is not a ritual. It's like a lifestyle. It's not an outcome. It's a process, and it takes time. So you should be focused on building things that are better, not chasing the results. So don't be so focused on, well, if I set out to lose 20 pounds and I've only lost 1 pound, then I'm just going to stop. No, celebrate those small successes. Continue, be consistent, and just look at that small result. The fourth problem is not anything outside of simply changing your environment. A positive environment promotes good habits. A negative environment impacts you negatively, and it does not help you to accomplish your goals. For instance, if you want to eat healthy, but you're constantly surrounded by unhealthy food, that makes it a challenge. So change the environment. If you're constantly surrounded by negative people, but you want to have a more positive outlook, then surround yourself by positive people. So if you are thinking, I am wanting to make a change, this is a simple thing that you can do, is just changing the environment, surrounding yourself by things that are positive. So the research gives an example here. They say every morning the alarm on your phone goes off. You pick up the phone, turn off the alarm, and immediately you start checking the email and social media. Before you've even made it out of bed, you're already thinking about a half dozen new emails. Maybe you've already responded to a few. You also browse the latest updates on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So those messages and headlines are swimming around in your mind. You haven't even got dressed yet, but your mind is already distracted and stressed. So if your goal for the new year is to cut down the stress, then do not put the phone in your bedroom. Put the phone in the kitchen. So when you wake up, you're able to wake up a few minutes, sit up, get ready for the day, and then go work on checking your phone and the messages. This really sounds really simplistic, but you will be amazed at the results that happens. So the last suggestion is assuming small change. Don't assume that small changes don't add up. A little bit goes a long ways. Those baby steps are really important. If you do too much, too soon, and it's too big, you are setting yourself up for failure. So you want to have something that is simple and realistic, and stick with that. Build the behavior first and then worry about the results. Let's take a look at our next slide. I have a